Good morning. Continuing the review and summary of the conclusion of Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're at the bottom of page 1450. Aleph Tov Nun. And what are we learning here? We're learning the dynamic of how the soul, as it comes down into our body, meaning our souls, into a body and to an animal soul, where it has to contend with all the desires and temptations and distractions, what he called meniyas v'ikuvim, the obstacles and impediments that the animal soul in its own self-interest presents. So the divine soul cannot just freely exercise its divine aspirations. So the process of this Avodah, so as we know, is that the neshama has resources. Like he keeps saying, the neshama b'koyach atzma was endowed with strengths and resources, both in the context of being able to comprehend and understand the divine, as well as to feel experience of love and reverence for Elokus, for the divine. Now that, of course, is vital because it's always good to appreciate something, to think what happens if we wouldn't have had that, God forbid. So then we'd be in this world and be completely dominated by material interests, whatever the animal soul wants. So the divine soul does have a set of faculties and interests of its own, namely transcendent divine interests, but it's still a battle, which is a big part of what Tanya is all about, that battle. So he tells us that there's a siyua. The neshama itself has this power, but because it comes down into a body and into an animal soul with all those challenges, it has a support system in place. And here's the support system consists of many aspects. We talked about the patriarchs, the Oves, the Shvatim, talked about Moshe Rabbeinu, Yeshua, Yecheskel. But namely here, the main focus, going back to the central theme of Ayin Beis, is the Malachim, the angels. Even though, even prior to the angels, he spoke about Einei Ha'eda, the eyes of the people, the leaders, Sanhedrin. It's all part of that support system. But here he's speaking about the Malachim specifically. So the Malachim serve as that, like I've said, cosmic support system. Earlier he described it like the digestive system. So it's a support. And in that process, it's support, but it's a siyua. The Avodah is still, the neshama itself is doing the Avodah, just as I gave the examples of any one of us as we go through our education and maturing process. We have many support systems, hopefully, but it's still the work is upon us, upon each one of us to do what we have to do. Okay. He also spoke about, therefore, before Shema, which is the main avodah of the neshama, its ability. That's what he called the shiras haneshamas. That's their song. That's their voice. Is the Shema. That prior to the Shema, you have the Birchas Yetzer, where we talk about the Malachim, but that's only a Haggadah. And he has explained that's in order to prepare and prep and prime the animal souls that it should be receptive and be maskim and agreeable to what the Nefesh Elokis has to offer. But he said, but the Ikra Tikkun Nefesh Abamis is from the Nefesh Elokis itself. Like he says afterwards, that or was it earlier? To be able to actually draw out and extract and free the animal soul from its crassness, that's through Shema of the neshama. But again, with his support. Then the final piece that we've learned so far rather, that this is the meaning. Okay, let's see here. So even though the asaga may come to them through the malachim, through the neshamas, but that's the neshama itself that's comprehending. Yeah, good. And that comprehension is higher than the comprehension of angels and malachim, even though malachim are more sublime in the giluyim, But bottom line is the neshamas are rooted in a higher place. That's why, as he said earlier, they actually come down lower because they have the capacity to go into a darker place than the malachim could ever go and transform it. Then the final piece that we learned so far is that this is the meaning when we say that the malachim is alim al yidei neshamas. The malachim actually, they begin as a support to the neshamas, but then they are elevated by the neshamas. And he brought the pasuk, the story with Yaakov, where he dreamt the sulam mutzav arza, the ladder that stands on the ground, reaching up into heaven, and malachi elakim, the angels of God, are elim v'yerdim. They ascend and they descend. And why? Because that's a result of, like he says, sulam is tefillah, is prayer. It's a result of the prayer that affects the aliyah and the elevation of the angels, as we'll soon talk about some more. A second interpretation there in the sulam that it's referring to Yaakov himself, the neshama itself, Knesset Yisrael, like he said, because Yaakov is the briach hatichon, he's like the middle rod that connects and interfaces between Kol Seidish Eskashu Seish Talshlus. Yaakov is the briach hatichon, so he himself is like the ladder himself. And then he reconciles these two interpretations, says, Shnei Pirushim Echad Hu. Both interpretations are one. I was thinking maybe Aleph could also be Emes, but I think he means one, because he says afterwards it's one. Not just they're both correct. That is obvious. But they're actually both one. Why? He goes on because Malchus, what Neshama, the level of Neshama, in this case, Knesset Yisrael, is Malchus. It's also the level of Tefillah, because it says Ani Tefillah, Ani is the level of Malchus. And like he says, so Knesset, the reason for that is because Knesset Yisrael Nikra Tefillah, she atzma b'chinas Tefillah. Liyesa Eila Lamayla. So it's not just that the Neshama uses prayer to elevate, but the neshama itself is the one that does the elevation. It's the one that prays. See, so they are considered like a one similar entity, or the same entity. And as I said, this helps explain the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, as I discussed in the previous class. I don't want to go over that right now. And then he brings that you have Nehura Tata, which is the shamas below, the light from below. Sometimes I think it may be called the waters below reach the waters above. I have to check that. But Nehura usually is Oyer. And so you need to have the neshamas there, they sing their praise, and through that, they in turn elevate themselves, of course, but also the malachim. And that's where we stopped. So I'm going to continue. He's going to go back to the ladder, now that we've established that these are two interpretations, but they're both really one, because neshama and tefillah go hand in hand. So I'm going to continue now, 5 lines from the bottom of page 1450. And if you want to follow the text, you need is just go to ayinbeis.com. So here's what he says. 5 lines from the bottom of 1450. So the line begins L'Nehura Ilah. So he says, "V'zeu v'hine sulam mutzav artze v'reishim magia shemaima." This is the meaning of the verse in Yaakov's dream, that here, behold, there's a sulam, a ladder standing on the ground, and the top of the ladder is reaching into Shemaima, into heaven. Pirush. So here's how he explains it in this context that we just learned, being both prayer and the Shema and Yaakov. Because that's how prayer works, just like a ladder. If you're climbing a ladder from the ground, from earth to heaven, where do you begin? You begin from the bottom up. You start with earthly matters. So he says, so that's how it begins. Prayer begins binyanim tachtenim. Before you get to very high sublime levels, like Hashem Echad of Shema, you begin tachtenim k'may b'psuka de zimra. So the early stages of prayer, psuka de zimra, the songs of praise that we say, Baruch Sha'amar, till Birchas Ubeyetzer Eir, that's Birchas Yetzer, where we talk about the Malachim, Shemedaber me'inyan shiras b'tishbachas HaMalachim. So first of all, Psukkah de Zimra talks about the grandeur and the beauty and design of the world, how God, praising God, the creator, the artist of the world. So you're talking about the world. You're not talking about God before the Tzimtzum or how God is on his terms. You're praising him through by looking at the world around us. Then when you get to Malachim, it says we're talking about their shiras v'tishbachas, their songs and praises of the Malachim, Shem Bal Gvul v'Tachlis. Malachim are part of the cosmic order. They're Bal Gvul v'Tachlis, they're defined finite entities. So yes, you're talking about how they're singing the praises of God, but it's who's singing? The angels in the shtalshlus that are defined and have their parameters. That's the beginning of davening. But then where do we reach? Ava misayemes. But the end of the prayer is bedvarim elyenim b'yeser. Is far more sublime, far higher levels. V'hu krishma b'yichudei Elah. When you get to Shema, you're not talking about the creation. You're not talking about existence. You're not even talking about the angels. You're talking about Hashem himself. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And furthermore, like we learned, it's Yichudei Elah. Not Yichudei, not that we look at existence and we come to realize all of existence is created by God. That's God as he relates to existence. Now we're talking about God himself, Hashem Echad. Like we learned earlier, the only exclusive reality. And further, after that comes the Shemoneh Esrei. So he does mention Shemoneh Esrei, which comes after Shema, the 18 blessings we say every day. B'chai b'rechayin, with its 18 blessings. So there too, you talk about much higher levels. Even though there talk about parnasa and there's talk about refuah, but generally speaking, Shema Yisrael, you're standing before God, is considered to be the highest prayer actually. Even though earlier we learned that Shemoneh Esrei is actually Shema in some ways is even higher than Shemoneh Esrei. I don't want to go into that right now. But bottom line is, we climb the ladder from the bottom up in Tefillah. And we begin first with prayer that we talk more about things that relate to us, and then slowly move into the world of God, basically. And this is the meaning of the ladders. Now that we established the ladder as prayer, that makes total sense. Because it's standing on the ground. It begins with ground, earthy matters, the world. And then we say, and this ladder reaches upward with the top of the ladder reaching into heaven. More heavenly, more sublime matter. So you see the diuk here in the ladder. The stages in davening. Now, this is in prayer, but remember we also said the second interpretation, which is one with the prayer, is the neshamas. The neshamas is also this way. V'chein ha-neshamas. So too is it with the souls. Neshamas yardu lamata beguf. Next page, 1451. The neshamas the neshamas originated from heaven, but we're talking here from the bottom up. The neshamas descended below into a physical body. And their root reaches all the way into heaven. The root of the neshama, as we've learned, is Atzmus Ein Sof. So it's true. There, the order you begin, the neshama was first above, then it comes down below. But Navedas Ha'adam, the neshama first begins below, through prayer. It begins, but where's the shadish? Where's it reach? It reaches all the way to its source, which is in heaven. Atzmus Ein Sof. Valkein al Yodam, and that's the reason, because the neshamas basically have both aspects to them. They are down on earth, but they reach and they have the capacity to reach all the way to their root and source. That's why through them, Yuchalias Yechudim Elyenim, that's why through them it could be the Aliyas. You could be the Yechudim Elyenim, the higher unifications. Because if the neshamas were creatures of earth only, then how can they create higher unifications in higher worlds? But being that neshamas are down on earth, but they're rooted in the higher levels, they can create Yechudim Elyenim Gam B'Atzilus or L'mayla M'Atzilus. So they also affect Atzilus and higher than Atzilus. And now he continues in explaining what does it mean, the malachim that go up and down this ladder. And that's why he says, not just that there's a ladder, v'hine malachi elikim elim v'yerdim bei. And now, behold, there are malachi elikim, divine angels, that are elim, that climb this ladder, v'yerdim bei. They're going up and down this ladder. What's that referring to? Da'idei neshamas, being that tefillah and neshama goes together. So the neshamas that are davening, in this case Yaakov, for example, oilim hamalachim gamkem. So such as the neshamas are climbing, they're also causing the malachim in heaven, or the malachi elikim in Bria, Yitzira, wherever they may be, to also elevate. If it just said we have a ladder, okay, so the neshama climbs the ladder from earth to heaven. But we're saying not only that, the malachim also are climbing on this ladder. They come down, but they also go up. Elim v'yerdim bei. The mepnei she'em misayim l'neshamas Yisrael. And what's the reason? Because they were a support system. Misayim, they helped neshamas Yisrael ba'aveidasam, in their aveda. Because initially it's the malachim that helped and support by, so to speak, warming up the animal soul. Their praise and their song and their connection to Hashem helped inspire the neshama. It didn't replace the neshama, but it's a support. Think of, like I said, like teachers, like mentors that help inspire. Since they help the neshama in their aveda, that's why al kain yesh lahem gam kain aliyah idei neshamas Yisrael elim. So it's not necessarily as a reward, but it means they're engaged in the process. Think of a good teacher who taught you when you were a child, and then you've become now far greater than that teacher. So besides the fact that the teacher has pride, you're also elevating him because it demonstrates what he did for you. And now that you've grown to that level, even though you may have surpassed the teacher, but he grows with you, through you. So but this aliyah that the malachim experience is dafka through Yisrael. Why? Why can't they elevate on their own? Why do they need the ladder that the neshama does through prayer? Because with their own power, the malachim have power, but they are in their own lane. They can't suddenly go to a new level. So malachim have the maila that they're initially spiritual. They are spiritual, as opposed to the soul that comes down into a physical, crass world. So that's why the neshamas help. But on the other hand, the neshamas, in concept, remain in their particular level. They don't have the ability to elevate that much. Elevate a bit, they do, through their avodah, but not kol kach. It's only through neshamas Yisrael that come down below, and the neshamas Yisrael that can reach to the highest levels, which is what gave them the power to come so far down, that the malachim too reach levels they could never reach on their own. Like we say, v'nesati l'cha mahalchim beina emdim ha'ela. So the pasuk says about the malachim, v'nesati l'cha. That he's talking about Hashem is giving, bestowing the ability for neshamas that are mahalchim, travelers, beina emdim ha'ela. You are travelers, you move between those that remain stationary, standing in one place. So Chassidus explains the malachim stand in one place, meaning they can elevate a bit, but they stay in their own lane, their own structure. So machal will always be ava. Real will always be gvura. Shenasim gam heim b'b'chinas mahalchim. So when you say nesatach mahalchim ben emdim me'ela, not only are you the neshamas mahalchim, but you're also causing those that are standing to also grow and elevate and travel with you. Meaning the neshamas cause the malachim also to become movers and shakers and to elevate higher than they were on their own, like it says elsewhere. So you see here now the whole thing, the circle comes all around. It began, the neshama comes down below, and it needs as much support as it can get because it's a dark world. So it needs outside light. Malachim serve part of that role. They support and they help inspire. The neshamas themselves, however, are really higher than malachim. And once the neshamas start climbing on the ladder, they also cause that the malachim should go higher than they were on their own. So the malachim end up benefiting from this whole process. They're not just a support, and then when you don't need them any longer, they're off the picture. No, they become also elevated in this process. That's what he added here in this discussion, this last section here. So we end the paragraph at the top of page 1451. And this really also ends a certain subsection. There's more to go, a few more pages to be exact. I'm going to go through now a few more pages. Oh, yeah. Another 10, 12 pages that he's going to talk more about Shamas Malachim and also Riyah. We're going to go back to the power of vision and more details before he gets back to the end of the Hemshech, which is the Magbi, which we'll talk about in the Shamas and Ner Mitzvah and Terer and so on. So let me stop here. Let me stop here. If anybody, one second. Let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything.
Why is it important for the Malachim? Why is it important for us that the Malachim are going higher?
Okay, that's a good question. Number one, first of all, it means that the neshamas are affecting the whole Seder Shtalshlus. I think one thing he wants to say, like he said, Yechudim and Atzilus and higher than Atzilus. I think that's on a more basic level. In other words, the neshamas are elevating the whole Seder Shtalshlus, including those that supported and helped the neshamas. I think on a deeper level, it could be, on a basic level, it's also a form of, I don't want to say schar, but the malachim were part of the process. So you don't want to reject, you want them to benefit from this whole process. The fact that they supported, it's like, if you have a supporter, let's look at an organization that helped you build your organization, even though you may not need their support anymore, you still honor them and you still bring them at the nachas, and they should be part of the growth that came from it all, on a very balbatish level. And finally, maybe on the deepest level, it's because at the end of the day, just like we learn about Torah, that neshamas are mashpia in Torah, after the neshamas elevate higher than Torah. So in the beginning, Torah is mashpia into neshamas. And then, like he said, mikara is daita the nafshe. You learn Torah in order for the nefesh to benefit from it. But then the neshamas actually, in turn, are mashpia in Torah, like we learned earlier. Similar that the guf today is nourished by the body. And losud lavi, neshama nuzunis min aguf. So it could be this is all part of that process. So first the malachim are the ones that support us, and then we elevate it, like the guf ultimately contributes and elevates the neshama. So basically, I think at the end of the day, it's all about an ultimate yichud that doesn't just reach the highest levels, but you also elevate the lower levels with you. So it makes the yichud much deeper. Like somewhat, we also learned, for example, the oir is begiluyim higher than the yesh. But once you discover ein arech lecha ba'elam hazeh, that the yesh teaches you about the infinite distance of atzmus, then he goes on and says, and that teaches us that also oir is ein arech. So you always see it comes back that you want to demonstrate that even the levels that initially were only like Giluyim or say the Ishtalshus, they too become part of the higher Yichud, which is the ultimate point that he makes later, and we talked about it as well, that Yichud Tata, even after Yichud Ilah, you still want Yichud Tata to join Yichud Ilah as it connects with Atzmus. So it's ultimately a union of Yichud Tata and Yichud Ilah. So in a certain sense, you could say the same thing with Malachim. Even though the actual hashpas, transmissions from Malachim is not as high as a neshama has on its own, meaning in its root, but still, it's like the Yichud Tata aspect. So that also becomes part of one total unity. Bottom line is, when Mashiach comes, Seder Shtalshlus is not going to disappear. Malachim are not going to disappear. Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, it's all going to be there. But it'll all be infused and saturated with an atzmizdike hamshacha because of all the Aveda and the neshamas that have elevated the Ishtalshlus to atzmus. So in the beginning, Ishtalshlus serves a role of channeling and being mitzamtzim, diminishing the oir, so that the kalim can receive it. But once the kalim get refined and they reach levels higher than the oir, they also elevate the oir that help them get there. So I think that's the broader picture in this context. Make sense? Okay. To me, it makes sense.
It makes sense.
Yeah. That's why you say, even when you say, Lo yolamdu oid isha sreyeyu, ki kulam yedu esi, but he continues, Lemektanam vad gdelam. What's the mekatan agadol? Kulim yedu esi. Because the Abish doesn't want to be mavatal, the cotton and gadol, the structure. He wants the cotton and gadol to, in their level, they should experience esi, atzmus. So it's atzmus b'tachtenim, dire b'tachtenim. It's still called tachtenim. Why? Because in Giluyim, it's a lower level. But now it's reached a level that's so high, and it elevates everything. So I think that's for sure the way to look at it. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. Now, one final piece that we're going to go through a little introduction to the next section. You remember, I referred to another mimer from the Alter Rebbe that the Rebbe Rashab began to focus on it on page 1408. It's quite a way back, like almost 50 pages ago, a little less, 43 pages ago. The mimer is Yiseva Venhu. It's a pasuk in Hazinu. Yitzornehu ki ishin einay. So he talks there about ishin einay, my pupil of my eye, of his eye, referring to the neshamas Yisrael. Ki chelik Hashem amei. I'm looking at page 1408 as we speak. And that's where he began to talk about the contrast of the neshamas and the malachim. This is all based on a Maimer Yiseva Venhu, Tovkuf Samach Zayin, from the Alter Rebbe, which said Shabbos Shuvah, or also Sukkos. Seems from some of the manuscripts that the Alter Rebbe said it again on Sukkos that year. Tovkuf Samach Zayin. Tovkuf Samach Zayin is the year 1790. 1796, because it's the beginning of the year, so it's not yet the new secular year. So that's what the Alter Rebbe said the Maimer. The Maimer is printed in the Sefer Maimorim, Maimori Admor Azok Tovkuf Samach Vav, volume 2, page 722, if you want to look it up. But Samach Tzedek, as usual, has a gloss on this Maimer. A gloss means a gloss commentary, which is also printed in that Sefer, but only in the first edition. For some reason, because the new edition, they're printing it in a separate book. Bottom line is, there's another Maimon from Tzemach Tzedek, and in Ayin Beis, he quotes from both places, the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, but also Tzemach Tzedek's editions. So a lot of the sections from page 1408 till where we learned here, not all, or from that Maimer, and a lot about the Malachim and the Neshamas is very much from that Maimer. With many additions, of course. I mean, the Rebbe Rashab, in the last 45 pages, has been discussing it at length. But it's clear that he's combining the Maimer Yosef Avenu with the Maimer HaMagbi L'Sheves, Mika Hashem Elokeinu HaMagbi L'Sheves, because there, in the Mitler Rebbe's Maimer, he talks also about Malachim and Neshamas, about Bichris Yetzer. So as I mentioned in the previous class, so there's definitely an overlap, and the Rebbe Rashab, many ways, interweaves these two Maimorim, and we come away with a bigger picture of what a neshama does and so on. So, for example, this focus on Aveda B'Koyach Atzmei, that's more in the Maimer Hagmi L'Sheves. But the contrast of Neshamas and Malachim is more Yiseva Venu. I'm not going to go right now into each piece that we learned in Ayin Beis, which comes from which Maimer, because the Rebbe Rashab definitely, as I said, interwove them both So you have here a bigger picture that is a combination of those two Maimarim. There's other Maimarim also the Rebbe Rashab has been quoting, but those two regarding this topic. So now, where we are now, is one more piece from that Maimar, which it doesn't actually quote word for word, but the content is there. And especially when we get a few pages from now, 1453, then he actually quotes more from that Maimar. So just giving you some context here. So we're going to go now into a discussion with a new pasuk that Rebbe Rashab is going to bring from the Maimar Yosef Avenu. And it's a pasuk from, I believe, from Shir Hashirim. The pasuk is Achalti Yari im Divshi. I ate the honeycomb together with the honey. So of course it's a mashal, it's an analogy, but what's it referring to? Remember, Shir Hashirim is all an analogy for the discussion, a dialogue, and the love between the Shamas Knesset Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rambam says that. And of course, Chassidus elaborates. So everything in Shir Hashirim, which speaks like a romantic poem essentially, is all about the relationship between Hashem and Neshamas, who were married by Matan Torah. Yem Chasanos is Matan Torah, so they have a loving relationship. From that is Nishtalshel, from that evolves the personal relationships that we have, our sacred marriages and unions that evolve from the union between Hashem and Neshamas. And that's why they go hand in hand. That's why you find in Kabbalah expressions, Yechudim, Zivugim. These are all expressions of love and of unity and of intimacy. You know, things like misses, we talked about nishikin, a kiss, a hug, an embrace. And that's the reason that you have to, when you learn these things, you have to learn it also with a certain subtlety and nuance, not to turn it into anything that's crass and misinterpret it. So it's all really talking about sublime levels of connection. So then one of the psukim, he says, Achalti Yori im Divshi. What is this Yori? What is Divshi? Says this is from the Alter Rebbe's Maimon. What we just learned, our difference between Neshamis and Malachim, is the difference in Yari and Divshi. Yadua, the Divshi who Krishma. Divshi, which is Dvash, my honey, is the level of Krishma. Why? The purpose of Shema, as we've been learning, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad Baruch Shem, then what? V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, to love God. That's the purpose of it. That's what Krishma is. Umidas ha'ava hi ayidei bonus dafka kaneda. And how do you reach this level of ava? We're not talking about just the natural ava misuteres, the dormant or the concealed love that's within every soul. We're talking about an ava that's alive and conscious and aware. He says that comes through his bonus dafka. That ava, like we learned, is bonus and Shema Hashem Echad. The ava shaloya yidei is bonus, eina ava amitis. An ava that doesn't come with contemplation is not a true love. She bechinas makiv bilvad. It's in a form of makiv. You could have natural love, but look, you could have people have natural love. They don't work on it, and they don't develop it and cultivate it. It could be there, but you can see it also doesn't necessarily affect you. Very often, I'm talking, let's say, pure marriage counseling, or counseling between parents and children. They love each other biologically. And husband and wife could also love each other. But if they don't work on it, and they don't continuously exercise those muscles, then you start taking things for granted. Things become more mechanical, like almost robotic, like automatic pilot. That doesn't mean the love is not there. But you can't call it avamitis because it can therefore also create a lot of dissonance. You love someone, but you could also hurt them. Why? Because you haven't really had a conversation with them. Like I think of examples. I've had the couples that I know that married for years, and I asked them, when's the last time they had a personal conversation? Not about paying the bills or about the children's education or something, about themselves. I remember them looking at each other, they say, we can't even remember it so long ago. And again, not because they don't like each other, because they just let things roll. Everyone's busy. Someone's working. There's the famous joke, if I may say a joke in this regard. Her husband and wife were exactly like that. They never had time for each other. They loved each other, but they never had time. She was a high-powered executive. He was busy with his work. So they finally said, enough is enough. We have to make time for each other. They both look at each other's at their calendars. Their calendars are full, like for months and months. Finally, the wife finds an opening somewhere, sometime in August. He looks at, no, oh, that's not good. They find something in the next month, whatever. They ultimately find a date. Months later. Obviously, it's clearly not a priority for them because all the other appointments seem to come before that. But that's the story. Finally, the big day comes. You know how these things go. And they're all ready and anticipating we'll finally have a day. It'll take the whole day. They're going to drive in the mountains and they're going to picnic. They made a whole plan. And they were looking forward, actually. And they haven't done it for years. They get into the car, a beautiful day, beautiful weather. Everything seems perfect. As it goes, since they're not really trained, they don't have experience to talk to each other. So they get into a fight about something. I don't even know what. And they start arguing. And that's it. And then they go into silent treatment. You know how it goes. They're stuck in a car with each other for hours. And they plan this. So instead of arguing, they both become silent. Finally, after like an hour driving, they're already up in the mountains, and they see in the meadow, in the field, one of them sees a donkey. So he thought maybe it's a good opportunity. He says to his wife, does the donkey remind you of anyone? Are you related to that donkey? I think that's what he said. Are you related to the donkey? Because the donkey is very obstinate and stubborn. So he asks his wife, are you related to the donkey? And she says, yeah, by marriage. Okay, that's the story. That's a joke. So I don't know if that ends up happy ending or not a happy ending. The point is, when you're not cultivating a relationship, what happens is it becomes dry and stale and stagnant. That's what happens. So it needs cultivation. So I'm just explaining a bit what he means by his bonanus. Without his bonanus, yeah, you can love God and you can pay lip service and you can even feel it at times, but it's not avamitis because it's makiv. Ve'en lo kiyum klal, and it will not be sustained at all for this reason. Sustain means in an active way. We're not talking about dormant within the soul and the heart. We're talking about in some active way. Oishi b'chinas katnus ma'id, or even if it is, it'll be very katnus. I don't want to use the word immature, even though it's a good word often for katnus hamechin. Katnus, he means it's not developed. Think of it like a very undeveloped love. It's there, but in a very basic way. It doesn't say mechanical, but basic. Maybe that's the right word. Katnus made. Like was explained earlier at length. I have the page 1222 and on. Be'inyan mutfa murgish. I quote that very often, right? Mutfa murgish muskel. 3 levels. Mutfa is essentially reflexive or impulsive emotions. Like a baby, a newborn baby has some emotions. They'll cry if they're hungry or tired, but you can't call them developed emotions. It's not developed. It's just its natural need for something was created, that it lets its parents or others know that I'm in pain or I need something. Murgish, we learned, was already starting a development, that the seichel is starting to work. It's like a feeling that is based on something where a child, let's say at 5 years old, still not fully developed, but at least a child 5 years old can say, please, I want something. Or it's coming with a little more intelligence. Obviously, the higher stages of emotional maturity, where your emotions are not just spontaneous impulses, but they're thought through. Like, a baby or even a young child can have a tantrum, an emotional tantrum. An adult, the emotions are there. You can be upset, but your mind is meant. We're talking about obviously someone's emotions matured. I know people who are middle-aged or they're quite, and their emotions are still childish emotions. But if you talk about mature emotions, the emotions now are tamed. They're undergone. They come after reflection. You don't just start having a tantrum or just getting angry or upset because someone just did something at the moment, and also on a positive end, you can develop. Can you ask little children to have relationships? No, they're not capable of having real relationships. They have friendships, but it's still on a childish level. Adults, you can expect a relationship where they talk to each other, where they understand each other, where they defer to each other. That's all higher levels. That's what we learned about mutfa, murgish, muskal, the stages, essentially 3 general stages of emotional maturity that comes together with intellectual maturity, like the hisbonenus, that brings to Av. This is all coming to explain why Divshi, why my honey, is Shema. He hasn't finished yet. He says, Ach, now that we've established that true Ava comes through hisbonenus, meaning a contemplation, which also helps us understand a lot what we learned earlier, what Shema really is. Krishma is that hisbonenus in Hashem Echad, with the Hamayrich Be'echad, with all the levels we discussed. Not Malach. Birchis Yetzer is Hagdama to that, but the main avodah of Krishma is that. So, Ach B'chdei Hisbonenus Yi Seder Sava. But now we need an additional ingredient. Because you could ask, okay, so you're telling me that a contemplation on, let's say, God, well, not let's say, that's about God, is going to cause me to love God. Just like when you concentrate on someone you love as a person, it's going to bring out the love. But he says there's a little more you need. In order for this bonus, that from the contemplation should stimulate love. It can't be a dry, so-called academic or cognitive contemplation alone. You need chayis in it, vitality, ve'enig, pleasure or passion. In other words, these bonuses is not just you're sitting down mathematically figuring out this is the person I'm married to, and it makes sense. I should love her or him. Same thing with Hashem. His bonus, a methodical as bonus. Since God created existence, He's the artist. Everything in this world comes from God. It has to have a chayis and einik. You need to have pleasure in it. You need to feel, even though it's still his bonus, but his bonus has to be personalized to the point that it's making you feel an attraction there. We learned actually, if you remember, that you could have his bonus about something that is good, but you haven't yet determined that it's good for you. It's good, but maybe it's good in concept. Like you determine this is a good thing. Very often you find this, I find it, people talk about a shidduch, they say, here's a really good person for you. Then time passes, they realize, 1 second, that person would be good for me. I mean, God ultimately determines who the person is, who the soulmates. But in other words, you don't always personalize. I don't know I'm not saying he's saying that here. I'm just trying to explain that his bonus alone can be detached. You want chayis and einig, you want it to be dynamic, alive, with vitality. And he explains, because we see the lepa'amim at times, keshemizbeinin be'inyan eliki. He's talking here, we can use the human example, but he's talking here, of course, about God, that when you contemplate on some type of divine idea, umasiga inyan betuv, and he understands the idea well, v'nikla ta'inyan, and the idea is absorbed within you, it's internalized, hativ, well internalized. B'meiche in his mind, b'hanocha teva. Hanocha teva means agutta upleg, means it's settled in. It's not just you learned the idea and it's been absorbed. And hanocha teva is like really well settled in, well integrated. Maybe the best way to say it. V'gam nispol b'sichle, and furthermore, your mind is excited by it. It's not just a dry, abstract idea. The mind, intellectually, we're talking. Al alakus. The small besichle alakus. Like sometimes we learn a thing about the levels of alakus we've been learning about, and you get excited. Not necessarily emotional excitement. Your mind is excited. It's an exciting idea. It's inspiring. It's stimulating. And he also in the seichel is excited on the godliness that he understands, that we just discussed, that which has been now properly absorbed, that's understood by him. U'makol mokim, and nevertheless, and this is where we need the oinig and the chayis. Lo yispol b'libei ba'ava. It doesn't mean that his heart is stimulated or aroused with love. It's an intellectual experience, intellectual excitement. I'll just give an example. You read about it often. Scientists who talk about an epiphany they had. They suddenly came up with a brilliant idea and they got excited and they got their friends excited. Can you call that ava in the heart? Or you call that an intellectual excitement, which is a big distinction in Chassidus. Not that intellectual excitement can't bring emotional excitement, but like I said before, it's an intellectual excitement. The idea is an exciting idea, but you haven't really made it yours emotionally, personal. Ava, once it comes into Ava in your heart, it's a whole very different experience. So V'ahavtas Hashem L'kecha obviously means love in the heart, not just the Ava b'seichel, or like Yispailas b'seichel. Why is that the case? Because everything that he understood still remains behelam, b'moichet. Behelam doesn't mean he's not aware of it. It means it's behelam from the heart. The heart is not engaged in it. Your emotions are not engaged. It's primarily an intellectual experience. And it wasn't drawn into the heart. Your heart, your personal emotions have not become engaged by it. And what's the reason for this? Why taka not? Why shouldn't a person who gets excited by an idea, why shouldn't it affect their heart? Because the contemplation was done coldly, in a detached way. Does not have a passion, doesn't have a vitality, a dynamic, and pleasure in that which he understands. Now again, here clearly there's a distinction between excitement and pleasure, and chayes and enig. Hispilus he has, because the mind can get excited about a new idea, a new innovation, solves a problem that you had, resolves a dilemma, etc. But chayes and enig, he's turning into a far more personal experience. Umeshum zeh, because it's cold and detached, so to speak, the person that is. Umeshum zeh eina mispal b'libei ba'ava lis nimshach lezeh. And that's why he's not stimulated, he's not excited and aroused in his heart with love to be drawn to it. The Rabbeim, for example, talk about this, about people who learn Chassidus. The Rebbe Rashab was really very upset about it, actually, and the Frierdiker Rebbe as well. The Rebbe Rashab is, they learn Chassidus, they learn, they understand well, and they're deep minds, but then they go off to their own lives. You don't see them daven. You don't see them pursue a relationship with Hashem. They understood the Chassidus like a philosopher and got excited about it, and they can explain it well. And actually, for a novice who looks at them, says, wow, the person is really taken by Chassidus. But you don't see it translating it into an emotional experience, personally, and also with others. That's what he's talking about here. So it's a hisbonenus, a good hisbonenus. We're not talking about a superficial one. And it also has spilus sichli. But it doesn't have the chayis and tanya. It's a kridus. Talk about, we're going to put him, kridus, amolek. No problem. Something big happened, but why are you getting so excited? Why are you being so personal about it? That's what Amalek said, like threw cold water on things. And he's going to give actually an example. So the Rebbe Rashab is actually elaborating, which is good, which is very refreshing. He says, "Akomay mi," going to give an example, like someone, shemufshab min hageshem. He's an abstract type of person. He's like removed from Gashmias. Someone who's not overly materialistic. Gam shemevin es adover Gashmi. So a person like that, who's not like into the gashmis of things, the material of things, even when he understands something physical, something a dover gashmi, ve'eich sheteva dover, and how it's good. But he's not a magoy. He's not a person who pursues material pleasures, let's say. But he understands with his mind this thing. He also understands it's a good thing. Lo yispol klal ba'avel. He's not going to become nispol with a love toward it. Because at a core level, on a fundamental level, he doesn't have a geschmack in it.
It's a good example for the Rebbe Rashab.
I'll just use an example. 1 second. I'll explain. So you have people like this. For example, there are people who are really, I'm not even talking now anything inappropriate or prohibited. There are people that, for example, I've seen this. You go to a restaurant, everyone's talking about the food is delicious, delicious. They're just not into food. They're either because they're more spiritual or whatever the reason is, or they're not into wine, or they're not into cigars. And others can literally are obsessed with it, and they can't understand. Why wouldn't you not enjoy this? Now, the person in seichel may say, "I understand the wine, and how it stimulates different taste buds. Wine is a whole big aveda for wine connoisseurs. Same thing with a cigar, same thing with a coffee, and so on. And yet, this person intellectually they can relate to it. They can understand the value of it, but they personally are not drawn to it. They're not affected by it. They don't have any particular love toward it. Not that they hate it; it's just not for them. So that's an example where the mind can understand it. The mind can even understand its value, like you said, the teiv shebezeh, teiv adover. But he's not excited with his personal love. Kamoy kein hu lehepech, k'she'en leitam va'enig b'alakus lo yispal ba'ava. And the same thing in the opposite direction. If he doesn't have a tam va'enig b'alakus, he's not going to get excited with love. Just like this person will not get excited by Gashmias because he's not a Magushim, he's not a Gashmiastic person, a material person. Same thing with godliness. The opposite side, obviously, because it's not Gashmias. That's someone that doesn't have a Tamba Einig in Elokus, he's not going to get a loving feeling. Okay, let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything. He's not finished. I see he's going to continue talking about how every neshama really does love God. I see a parenthesis here. How long does this parenthesis go? Oh, it's not a short parenthesis, I think. I'm just looking. I think it's all the way to the bottom of the page, if I recall correctly. Maybe not. I have to find it. Okay. But let me stop right here. And any questions?
I just said before that this example for the Rebbe Rashab is talking about mufshot min geshem. But you gave example also for Anoshim Kerkeinu.
I'm specifically giving an example for us. That's something we can relate to. You have it. The Rebbe Rashab for sure that a Rebbe was not interested in Gashmias. But I wanted to give something that we can relate to exactly. So yeah.
I have a question about this Hisbonenus, which is this whole section we're talking about here. We've talked about the aspects of Hisbonenus and Kriyas Shema, and also the Yichud Tata, Yichud Ila, how it start with Yichud Tata, and how the Eibishter is giving you everything you have, everything that's good and it's beautiful in the world. And then ultimately everything is the Eibishter from the top down. Everything's cool, Elokus, everything. So those are understandings, and certainly gaining appreciation for something someone's given you definitely inspires. I think, hopefully, at least respect, appreciation, gratitude.
Right.
But these are cognitive. These are intellectual contemplations, and I think, like the Rambam says, what's the commitment of Avta Shem Elokecha? This is exactly what we're talking about. These intellectual contemplations. You can't command someone to love, but you can command someone to think. So the question is, nevertheless, the Rebbe Rashab here is talking about very emotional feelings that one must surpass these intellectual contemplations, the ones I just sort of identified.
You're just explaining what he's saying, or you have a question?
The question is again, the question is how does the contemplation itself lead to love?
That's what he's saying. He says it won't lead without chayes and einig.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what he's building here. That's what he just said. He
and
says,
I don't.
his bonus needs. He's adding another ingredient. It's exactly what he's discussing here.
I get it. That's why I'm asking the question. I don't remember how this continues. The sugi. Does he go on to
so
elaborate?
Maybe wait. So that if you want to wait till he continues, but that's exactly what he's talking about. He said these bonus could be one that's detached, or cold, or makif, or not lasting. I mean, he gave a bunch of different things with many practical examples.
Yeah.
I mean, also think practically. This is a practical situation. You could have his bonus that does not bring vahafta. So he's saying we need in this bonus, achayis v'einig is the words he's using, in order to lead to vahaftas Hashem Elokech. And I gave a few examples. A person can learn chassidus and it doesn't bring to vahafta. Other things can happen as well. I mean, he's obviously not finished the topic, but that point he's made very clear.
Okay, I think I just need to sit in the saddle and wait to see how it develops.
Thank
you.
Are there any other questions? Anybody?
The reason why we don't need this bonus in Inyone Oilamaze because this is in our nature, built in our nature.
Well, yeah, because Elam is bepshitis. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Rabbi Teichtel's point is that it doesn't come naturally because that's not how we operate in where we live. Is that what his point is?
He's simply saying why don't we need contemplation to get pleasure in the physical world? Because the nefesh habamis and so on relates to the physical world very directly. The answer is because we do have chayes v'einig in Elam Hazeh. That's the answer. Elokus, you need to build that chayes v'einig. Just like you need his bonus, you need also chayes and einig, which he's going to explain why it's called honey.
Sure. Good. Nice comment, Rabbi Teichtel.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll stop here. We'll stop here right before the parentheses, which I don't think is a short parentheses if I recall. But maybe we'll see. We'll stop here, middle of page 1451. Okay, good.
Class tomorrow?
What are we doing? So that's what we have to ask. What do you guys want to do for